owners take nothing for granted. They are constantly working to preserve for future generations the culture and the heritage that Chinatown represents.
The key is the culture, which they prefer serve Chinatown. That would include the language itself, the food, in particular food. There's no Chinese community without Chinese food culture, obviously. And it's not just the preserve the older-fashioned Chinese food, but the more modern, more diversified, more kind of different kind of provincial type of Chinese food. That would make it really colorful.
And throughout history, nothing has brought people together like food. The tastes, the smells and textures, it awakens the taste buds, and so much more. On a regular basis, I like to eat in Chinatown. I think the food is awesome, and I do a regular dim sum with friends in the downtown Chinatown. There was one particular event called Night Market, really mimicking how Taipei's night market played out. It's this amazing place where you can, sample different types of foods and just have fun, and it goes, late in the hours, and it really draws youth out.
I find comfort in going to Chinatown, whether it's the Chinatown south on Spadina, or the East Chinatown to go eat Vietnamese, or going north to get those traditional Chinese desserts, like Sai Mai Lo, or like really good Hong Bao Sa, right? All my sort of home comfort foods.
We've got great Chinese food here, all sorts of even Chinese ethnic background foods from Shanghai to Cantonese, and it really helps me feel at home. Restaurants like the Bright Pearl have been making customers feel at home for the past 12 years.
In the 70s, there was a wave of immigrants from Hong Kong that came to Canada. Chinatown has always been a beachhead for new immigrants, through histories of Toronto. So they end up in Chinatown, and they happen to have a building big enough, large enough to have a restaurant of this type, and that's how it got started.
Located near Toronto's funky Kensington Market, the Bright Pearl caters to a broad mix of customers.
A good part of people coming to Chinatown today are not really Chinese. So I would say, the restaurant, although is a Chinese name, Chinese theme, but it's for everybody.
And as Chinatowns have expanded throughout the GTA, so too has the culinary experience these areas serve up.
There was a time that I would only eat Chinese food in downtown Chinatown. But with the many Chinatowns that we now have in Toronto, you can go anywhere and have equally good food.
I see, especially in the suburbs, kind of a less clearly defined boundary of where Chinatown, begins and ends. In the 70s, you might have had one specific street where all the Chinese restaurants congregated. Now, you can drive and you see Chinese restaurants pop up here and there.
We are so fortunate to be in Toronto, because to live in Toronto that way is more like going around all of China, one shot. But you can do it all in one city. And I think it's very important to do so.
The Chinese food that I would have eaten in Scarborough in the 1970s is different than, the stuff I can get in Markham today. When there was a huge influx of immigrants from Hong Kong in the 1990s, that really transformed, the cuisine of Toronto and made it better, and, different things. Now you can get Muslim Chinese food, something that you wouldn't have seen 10, 20 years ago. This is, it's in constant change, and these are all parts of the Chinese fabric. A fabric that becomes richer, more intricate, and, yes, tastier every year. belly, and you have that moment of, oh yeah. Well, this is mine.
Sprinkled with cinnamon, sparkling with taste. Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Enjoy the sensation.
Nature Valley sweet and salty bars are made with natural ingredients, like almonds, cashews, peanuts, whole grain oats, a delicious nut butter coating, and a touch of honey. It's inspired by nature.
I started using powders when I was 18.
I was young.
I even started using them at work. But not anymore.
I'm done with powders. Break the habit of artificially sweetened powders. Tetley Infusions is made from real brewed tea with no artificial sweeteners, flavors, or colors. Tetley Infusions. For water, for you.
உங்களுக்கு தெரியுமா 20 பேரில் ஒருவர் தைராய்டு நோயின் ஏதோ ஒரு வகை தாக்கத்துக்கு ஆட்பட்டிருக்கிறார் என்பதனை நீங்கள் அல்லது உங்கள் அன்புக்குரியவர்கள் எவரேனும் களைப்பு, பதட்டம், பொறுமையின்மை, உடல் நிறையில் மாற்றம் அல்லது உரோம உதிர்வு போன்ற குணங்குறிகளை கொண்டிருந்தால் எம்மால் உங்களுக்கு உதவ முடியும். மேலதிக விவரங்களுக்கு தைராய்டு ஃபவுண்டேஷன் ஆஃப் கனடாவினை நாடுங்கள்.
There is some debate about what the future holds for Toronto's Chinatowns. They will continue to be there, everyone agrees on that. But what will they look like in, say, 5 or 10 years from now?
I think it's going to change. I think it's going to be less Chinese people actually live here. And this area we have to revitalize down the road, in 10 years down the road. I think it's going to be a place called Chinatown. It's always remembered as Chinatown. However, it will be a place known as Chinatown.
I think it's important to preserve Chinatown communities. It's not just the preservation, it's the culture. As long as they don't become discriminatory areas, and I don't think they are, I'd like to think that they celebrate the culture, the food, the stores that we have that are quite unique. It makes for a very colorful city, particularly here in Toronto.
I think the Chinatowns and the Chinese people are very vibrant and bring in new things, and things keep changing. So there's a revitalization that I think is taking place and has taken place over the past 30 years. So it's very exciting to see preservation of how things were, but it's also great to see things develop and, the best things continuing to thrive and just displacing some of the old stuff as the community continues to build.
I think it is by and large up to the city to preserve this treasure of Toronto. Down the road, many years down the road, I think people should remember this is a place where a certain time in the history of this country, certain people have done the contribution at that time, and that's what is important.
One other thing that everyone agrees on, young people will be an indispensable part of that building process.
The leadership for the future has to include people of Chinese descent more. That we have to take a responsibility, or the younger ones have to take a responsibility of becoming more involved. And so we need young people who will feel a certain passion for what they're doing and to speak out more and to become some of the politicians, some of the leaders in the greater community, not just in our own community.
I believe it's very important to preserve the Chinese culture, especially amongst youth, because it's our roots, it's who we are.
The main important is get the youth involved, make them interested in Chinatown and feel like part of it. The problem they have, the young people today, many of were born here, they cannot speak the Chinese language, and they are quite ignorant about Chinese culture, and therefore we have to promote the Chinese culture and the language so that they still feel they retain a Chinese culture.
It is very important that people preserve that Chinese culture because it is part of their Chinese Canadian identity.
And perhaps that's the key to preserving Toronto's Chinatowns, strengthening the bond between the two cultures.
As Chinese Canadians, we're both Chinese and Canadian, so it's very important that we feel proud to be Chinese and Canadian. And in order to build that pride, I think we have to, first of all, understand who we are. So we have to know the Canadian part of ourselves as well as the Chinese part of ourselves.
Chinatowns in Toronto, in the long run, in my opinion, will become more and more integrated into the major mainstream communities. Even though the cultures will stay as such, which I think would be an excellent thing, but it will not be so much clear-cut Chinese, non-Chinese, because you will see more and more mainstream people mixing in as well.
Because Canada is such a multicultural country, very often, we come across people from all sorts of, ethnic backgrounds. So I feel that if we want to respect others, we first have to respect ourselves. So we have to first then learn about our own culture, our heritage, in order to respect ourselves and then share it with others.
And in the end, Chinatowns here and elsewhere will survive and prosper by becoming more diverse, more of an ethnic and cultural mosaic, much like the nation itself.
The following program has been produced with descriptive video. To access this feature, please tune your television to the secondary audio program. It's not the biggest in the country, but like the city itself, Montreal's Chinatown is one of the liveliest. The twin city to Shanghai, China, it has a style and a feel that make it distinct.
In French, this area is known as Le Quartier Chinois, and it's best explored on foot, which is certainly not a problem here on Rue de la Gauchetière, which is closed off to traffic anyway.
It's basically a one-street Chinatown. Everything is located on the La Gauchetière Street. You have shops there, restaurant mostly, you have some grocery store, and you also have building on the top floor, second floor, you have the Tong Association.
Yap Lo has been an active part of Chinatown and the Chinese community for years. He moved here with his family 40 years ago and remembers when Montreal's Chinatown was actually bigger than Toronto's.
The Montreal Chinatown, relatively speaking, was one of the biggest in Canada. I think at the time there was still